So we are going to spend the next hour, maybe less, could be 45 minutes. We like to be short. We're going to go over basically, we want to get rooftop solar growing for everyone. My name is Dave Rosenfeld. I'm the executive director of the Solar Rights Alliance. With me is Kaylee Underhill, Solar Rights Alliance's advocacy and development director. And today we are going to be talking about, our goal is obviously that we want to get rooftop solar growing for everyone. But we have an obstacle, which is that the monopoly utilities see rooftop solar as competition. And so they have been working very, very hard to try to squash rooftop solar, to basically make it harder for people to get it and to make it so that the people who have it basically ruin your investment. And we and hundreds of thousands of people, including you, have been fighting very, very hard to prevent them from doing it. We've had some successes, we've had losses. It's a very, very hard fight. And it's one that's ongoing. But one thing that has been a problem this whole time has been that the utilities have been very cleverly and effectively spreading a lie about rooftop solar that we're going to talk about. And it's a lie. We have been contesting it very hotly, and you have as well. We have been working with an energy economist and some other experts to really dig in and just show very clearly just how much the utilities are lying about rooftop solar. And we're excited to share some of this information we've had for a while, but a lot of this is new, or at least newly clarified. And what we want to do is share this data with you. We also have it on our website. Many of you hopefully have gone to our website and learned about it. We want to share this with you, and we want to give you a chance to give us some questions. And so give us about 20 to 25 minutes to run through the information that we have for you. As you have questions, there is a Q&A button. If you kind of just move your mouse a little bit, you'll see there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and you should just fire away with questions. And once we're done with the upfront presentation, then we will look at the questions and try to answer as many of them as we can. We won't be able to answer all of the questions, but we will answer as many as we can. And if we don't get to your question or you think of other questions, you should email us at info@solarrights.org. You should always feel free to do that. And we'll repeat that several times through the course of this webinar in case you've forgotten. We are recording this. We will be emailing this out to anyone that registered for it. So that's there for you. And we will also post it on our website. So with that, I think we should just kick things off.
All right. So again, hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee. I'm the Advocacy and Development Director with Rooftop Solar. And we're going to start off here with just a little bit of a level set in terms of where we are and where we're going and how this new information fits in. So first off, everyone here knows, and the vast majority of California knows, that rooftop solar has been really good for California. It helps to lower the cost of the grid for everybody, even people who don't have rooftop solar, because it reduces the amount of money that needs to be spent on other infrastructure to get energy to people. And so rooftop solar is one of the most environmentally friendly ways that we have to make energy. It's also a really unique resource because the energy that gets made can be shared with neighbors. So when folks put solar panels on their roof, the sunlight hits those panels, the panels power the home in real time. And there's usually some extra energy left over because this technology has become quite powerful. And so it often generates a bit more energy than the home needs. And that energy goes out onto the grid and serves the houses right next to that solar user. So this is local energy being made and used at the source. And because of that, you then not only don't need as many poles and wires to serve the home with solar, but you also don't need as many poles and wires to serve the neighboring homes as well. So it benefits everyone, even again, the folks who don't have solar immediately on their roof. It is also the case that solar is for everybody everywhere. 60% of all rooftop solar users are working and middle class, and 53% are people of color. And this information comes directly from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab of Solar Demographics. These two graphs tell a really interesting story, and I want to take a minute with these and just make sure that folks understand what we are seeing here. So the first thing, just to broadly understand, is that we now have 2 million solar roofs on the grid. Thank you to everyone on this call who is part of generating that clean energy. And that has had a profound impact on peak demand. Peak demand refers to the most electricity demand that we as a state need on any given day. So let's take a look first at the graph on the left. The grid is built for a day like this. This graph represents a typical day this August. So think of the hottest, generally, day of the year. You're thinking a date in August or September when it's really, really hot in most places of California. And as a result, the need for energy spikes. And this is what we call the true peak, this red line right here. That's the real energy need on that hot day in August. Folks, check out this yellow section. This yellow section is your rooftop solar. This is energy that is being generated entirely behind the meter that is never needing to draw from the grid. This orange chunk right here that you can see also has these little tails. These are other forms of utility scale clean energy sources, think solar and wind. And then this is the remaining demand, what isn't being met by those resources. So what this graph is showing is that actually there is a true peak that we don't even have on the grid anymore because rooftop solar and utility scale solar and wind combined have eaten the peak, have taken away the need for all of that energy to be on the grid. And you can see that now what we have left is this second peak in the evening. And that's part of what you're seeing in the graph on the right. So the graph on the left shows the impact, the true impact of rooftop solar on a hot, hot day in August. So what happens then when it is not a hot, hot day, an outlier day in, say, April? So it's not hot yet, the sun is shining, so a lot of energy is being generated. You may have heard of a nickname for this graph before called the duck curve, because this part here sort of looks like a duck and this belly here is a duck. And what it's showing is that on this day, you can see this part at the bottom, a little bit more energy is being generated than what we need. Make no mistake, we need all of that energy when August comes around. So that is not wasted energy. That's energy we absolutely need, and that's what the grid is built for. But in this moment, if that energy was captured in more batteries, it could be deployed over here, where this blue part is. So the concept is that you could, now we've removed one whole peak, which you can see here, we could remove the other whole peak if we had more batteries to shift this energy into this time of day. So this both shows the incredible growth and potential for what rooftop solar can give to the grid. Those models were based on current energy usage. As we all know, we're headed into an EV world where lots and lots of people are going to be using electric vehicles. And so if rooftop solar returns to its pace in 2021, it could cover nearly half of the projected increase in that electricity usage. You can see that here. You've got the bar without solar, you got the bar with solar to see what we would need to do. If we only respond to electrification by building those power lines and faraway power plants, ratepayers, all ratepayers, are going to wind up paying more for that infrastructure. So this leads us to what Dave was talking about. So we have this very, very clear path where rooftop solar has made an enormous difference in the state of California in terms of our energy needs, and it can have a profound impact moving forward to reduce the cost of the grid for everybody. The issue is that the monopoly utilities don't like rooftop solar because if they build less of that stuff, they get less guaranteed profits. So when you put solar panels on your home, it means that they need to build fewer poles and wires. They get a guaranteed profit, you can see here in this comic, this 10% rate of return on building these poles and wires. And if you have rooftop solar, then if they're building less of it, in their mind, they're getting less of those profits. So they're pointing to rooftop solar to say, it's your fault that the cost of energy is rising, when really The cost of electricity in California has skyrocketed because of the monopoly utility spending. When they spend, they profit, and those spends that they put out there then go back into us, the ratepayers, and we wind up having to pay for that on our bills. They profit, we lose, and they've managed to keep this going for so long by scapegoating rooftop solar. I'm going to hand it over to Dave now to talk about the data that underlies some of the statements that I've made here. Before I do, I just want to note that I've seen a few hands go up. We're going to take all questions at the end. So if you give us about another 20 minutes or so to make our way through the content, we'll make sure we take those questions at the end. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. That's how we'll be answering those questions. So over to you, Dave.
Okay, thank you, Kaylee. So, you know, it would be nice if we could just tell our story just through a cartoon. And we can. That was an excellent cartoon, in my opinion. But we can also tell this story through data, really good data. And so the next couple of slides are based on data that was developed by Richard McCann, who is an energy economist. You should look him up and you know, review his work yourself if you want. And so let's go to the next slide. And I want to get into detail, embellish a bit on what Kaylee was saying. So rates have been going up. They've been going through the roof. Doesn't matter what part of the state that you live in. If you're a customer of PG&E, Edison, or SDG&E, rates have been going through the roof. Utilities claim that that's because of rooftop solar. It's absolute nonsense. More than 90% of the rate increases of the last couple of years are 100% because of utility spending increases on what's called transmission and distribution. That is what is driving rates. Transmission and distribution is, in simpler terms, poles and wires. And when we're talking not so much about the poles and wires in your neighborhood. We're talking about the poles and wires that are used to ship energy from far away over long distances into cities and towns. And that is incredibly expensive. The utilities have been on a spending spree over the last 20 years, building new poles and wires. And that is what is driving the rate hikes. There's a little bit of other things that are in there. Of course, it's not 100%, but over 90% for each of the major utilities, the rate hikes are almost one-to-one attributed to spending increases on poles and wires. Next slide. This is a little bit more detail, and it might be a little hard on the eyes, but it's basically telling in more detail the same story as the previous slide. For each of the three utilities, the dashed line and the solid line, one of them is spending increases. The other one is rate increases. And you can see there's an almost one-to-one ratio for each of the investor-owned utilities of spending to rates. The line that's got the short little dashes is what utility spending would have been had it just been pegged to inflation, just to give you a sense of just how out of whack utility spending has been relative to the cost of other goods. Next slide. You might be going, well, isn't that spending because of wildfire mitigation, right? That's like a big thing right now. Wildfire mitigation is a cost, but it is not the cost driver. It's not the reason why rates are going up. Wildfire mitigation is about 12% of all utility spending. So it's important, it's expensive, but it's not what's driving up rates. It's actually a relatively small portion of overall utility spending. So that's not why utilities have been spending so much. Let's go to the next slide. Another thing you might be wondering is, well, okay, if it's not wildfire mitigation, then maybe the reason why utilities are spending so much is because people are using more electricity. The economy has grown, the population has grown, we're starting to electrify, people got all the electric cars, but that's not this case either. So what this chart does is takes similar numbers that you've seen in the last couple of slides. This is basically utility spending on poles and wires over the last 20 years. Each of the utilities, each color represents a different utility. And you can see it's just gone up and up and up and up and up way faster than the rate of inflation. And this purple line is peak electricity demand over a 20-year period. And you can see that it has basically been relatively flat. There's a little up here, a little down here, but basically relatively flat. And so, no, all of this spending increase is not for wildfire mitigation. And no, it hasn't been to meet some giant increase in electricity demand. Now, you might be going, next slide, please. How is it possible that electricity demand has been flat over 20 years? Because the economy has grown, population, electrification. You've guessed the answer. It's rooftop solar. So this is the same purple line that you saw in the previous slide. This is what state energy planners thought was going to happen. And in a sense, it did, in as much as peak electricity gross consumption, total consumption did go up. But the difference between these two things was met by your solar panels. So yes, there's more people consuming more electricity, but demand on the grid didn't really change that much because of your solar panels. And that difference represents billions of dollars in infrastructure that we should not have needed to build. By the way, it also represents blackouts that didn't happen. You should be thanked. Like you performed a heroic service to the people of California. And instead of taking advantage of that, the utilities and regulators and state policymakers squandered it and let the utilities spend like drunken sailors anyway. And now rates, are through the roof. So that's why electricity rates are going up, because of utility overspending on poles and wires, that some of which we needed, but an awful lot of it was just waste and profit mongering. Next slide. And when I say profit mongering, I mean profit mongering, because utility profits have been through the roof. Yes, there was a little bit of a drop, in and around the PG&E bankruptcy and, that whole mess, but look how quickly they recovered. Look how quickly everybody recovered. And this is not accidental, because this is how utilities make their money. The government guarantees them an 8 to 10% profit off of every dollar that they spend on new transmission and distribution. New transmission and distribution. They are incentivized to build shiny new things. And again, we need poles and wires. No one is saying that we don't, but there is a limit to everything. And the utilities have tested that limit, gone way over the line, and we are all paying for it. And so it is insane that then after all of this, they turn around and they blame rooftop solar. Let's go to the next slide. And now let's move this to Kaylee to talk a little bit about nonetheless, the utilities still say, it doesn't matter what the facts are, right? The utilities still blame rooftop solar for high rates. And Kaylee's going to talk a little bit about the origins of this lie and a little bit of how this lie got any kind of traction whatsoever, just given what the data says.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I think the first thing to understand here is that this was not an accident. This wasn't something that just happened. This was actively planned out and cooked up by the monopoly utility. It was invented by the monopoly utilities. So the Utilities National Trade Association actually cooked this up as part of a propaganda campaign specifically designed to squash rooftop solar in the state of California. And this image here is an actual screen grab of a strategy memo that was leaked, and you can read it. And when I read it, I was really startled to see some of the language that we see the utilities using in some of their messaging, like emails that many of you have sent to us when you get them. Much of that language comes from this memo. So this is a real planned, organized effort by the utilities, and you can see that here. So then if the utilities put this all together as a propaganda campaign, well, then where do they get their numbers from? So when they're claiming that rooftop solar is a cost to everyone else, where does that come from? Well, a utility consulting firm cooked up that math for the quote unquote cost shift claim. They hired this firm called E3 to do rooftop solar cost benefit analysis in California. And E3's client list includes a ton of monopoly utilities, including PG&E, SoCal Edison, and San Diego Gas and Electric. And their work is full of cherry-picked assumptions that grossly distort the reality. And part of the problem is that these are the only numbers that get repeated by the Public Advocate, HERN, NRDC. None of those organizations have done their own math. They're simply taking what the utility consulting firm created and repeating it. I also want to dive a little bit deeper here into what we're saying about this cost shift study, where these numbers come from. There are a lot of things that are really wrong, frankly fraudulent, with the calculations that make this claim that rooftop solar is causing rates to go up. There are 5, though, that we want to really highlight for you, because I think it demonstrates just how completely out of whack their math is. So the first is that when they are calculating this, they are including solar self-consumption, meaning energy that you use behind the grid that never touches the meter. So they're including energy that the utilities did not generate, do not serve, and do not move as a cost to people who are not you. So if you have solar on your roof and you're using it to power your own home and not drawing that energy from the grid, the utility consulting firm is saying, well, that's a cost to other people. But self-consumption is just like any other form of energy efficiency. It's like hang drying your laundry or turning off your lights or turning off your air conditioning or heat. So that's major problem number 1. Major problem number 2 is that this looks at only now. So they looked only at 2024 utility cost savings and ignored future savings. And you can see that in the chart here. The reason this matters is that all of those large savings that come afterward, that's when the real benefit is, with all of this T&D spending that doesn't need to happen because this rooftop solar is getting onto the grid. Problem number 3 is that they use unrealistic assumptions for how much it's going to cost to get those large-scale renewables on the grid. We all know that in order for the state to hit our clean energy goals, we do need a mix of both. We need rooftop solar, we need utility scale solar. But let's get rooftop solar on as many roofs as we possibly can before we turn to those other resources, because the cost of those large scale renewables is quite large, not just because it costs to build them, but because it costs to build the infrastructure that moves all of that energy, and there is a loss of energy as it gets moved. Big problem number 4, as we pointed out earlier, is that they are ignoring electrification. They're assuming that the peak now is the peak that it's going to be, and they're not accounting for that exponential growth in electrification that the whole state is saying we're moving towards. And number 5 is that they are ignoring what customers actually pay. So for those of you out there who have rooftop solar, you know that you're on a time of use plan, for example, and there are lots of other things that go into what is actually on your bill, and all of that is ignored. They assume that all customers pay a rate all the time and that that is what you pay. And of course, any of us who got a bill from any of the monopoly utilities know that that's not the case. So these are just 5 of the really deep and frankly fraudulent components that have gone into these utility calculations. I also just want to add here that there is pretty significant agreement amongst academics that the cost shift myth is exactly that, a myth, a lie that was invented by the monopoly utilities. And so we have here Mark Jacobson, who is a Stanford professor, and we thought it was just worth it to just show you this individual. And this is just the title of his post on this. You can go read it for yourself. It's well worth the read if you have a few minutes. This is what is happening, and academics are acknowledging that this is the case as well. The last piece I want to go over here in terms of how this happened, and I actually started seeing this popping up in the Q&A, so I'm glad that we can address this now, and we're happy to answer more questions on this later, but I do see that the questions are there, so what is the role of the governor in all of this? So between 2022 and 2024, the Newsom administration gutted the state's rooftop solar policies. So if we go back to 2022, Newsom signed a bill that declared all small commercial solar projects to be public works, like bridges and roadways, so treating them very differently. In December of 2022, the California Public Utility Commission, which you'll hear us refer to as the CPUC, voted to slash that extra energy that homeowners are sending to the grid by 80%, which made it much more difficult for solar to pencil out for folks. In November, of 2023, the CPUC went another step forward and voted to basically make it impossible for apartments, schools, and farms to benefit from their own rooftop solar on their roof. Never mind the exports, the actual using the energy on their roof to offset their bill. Then in April of 2024, the Contractor State Licensing Board, which also has members who are political government appointees, stripped solar contractors of their ability to install, repair, and maintain solar power batteries, including ones that they themselves had installed, despite 40 years of this work being done without any safety incidents. That decision will force even more solar companies out of business, and it has the potential to jeopardize consumer solar warranties, since if you need someone to come and repair your battery, that work needs to be done by the solar installer who installed it in the first place. Otherwise, it tends to void the warranty. So this is an additional issue. And then in May of 2024, the CPUC approved one of the highest utility taxes in the country, which will raise bills for anyone who has a small energy footprint, which includes folks who live in a small home or a condo who do not have rooftop solar, and folks who have rooftop solar and are using any form of energy efficiency. And then lastly, the CPUC essentially voted to make community solar basically impossible. The concept of community solar is to have a small solar array in a lot that wouldn't otherwise be used, like a brown lot, and have those solar panels serve neighboring homes as though the panels were on the roofs of those homes. So it's sort of like a cross between rooftop solar and like a little local lot. So you can, solar users who are nearby could lease or buy the use of those panels. This works well for folks who roof isn't compatible for solar or who wouldn't otherwise be able to get it. It's been highly successful in many other states. Here, the California Public Utility Commission voted to make that impossible. The last piece that I believe is we have not added onto this list is that recently Governor Newsom also vetoed the bill that would have solved, at least in part, what the CPUC did to take away solar rights from renters and from farmers. So that was the most recent, and that was just a few weeks ago. So I'm going to hand it back to Dave to talk a little bit more about, what this means for rooftop solar now that all of this has happened. Where are we now?
Yeah, thank you, Kaylee. And this is the bad news part of the webinar. One thing I just want to say is the data that we showed you earlier, I think is in some ways, I know this may sound a little odd, is the good news. Meaning like this is I think the clearest data that I think I've seen in a long time that really clearly shows just how what really is driving up rates, just how much it's utility spending and asleep at the switch regulators. That's why rates are going up. And I think our opportunity here is to take that information and really share it and use it to educate our lawmakers, members of the media, and do that over and over and over again. We're going to fight this lie, and we're going to need your help to do it. And but we do want to show and just be real with what this lie has been able to do. This utility lie has been the justification for these policies that the Newsom administration has done, and rooftop solar has gone off a cliff. And so what you can see here is this is the growth of rooftop solar. This is like, new installations every year since 2020. And you can see this has generally been the growth. It's been steady as she goes, kind of up and up and up and up, but this has generally been the solid, thing. There was a rush to the gates, mid last year as NEM 3 was about to go into effect, and then it fell off a cliff. And you can see it hasn't really recovered. Installations are at the lowest point that they've been in 10 years. And the reason why this is color-coded is to show you in this way the same thing we showed you earlier, which is, who are the people that are getting solar and who are the people that are then essentially cheated out of getting solar because of what the Newsom administration has done. You can see here, this orange band is households that make between $50,000 and $100,000 a year, middle-income people. Those are the folks who were the most likely to get solar before NEM 3. And they're still the ones that are getting solar, but you can see in much smaller numbers. This is basically taking choice away from the middle class. That's what this is. And so that's the impact. Let's go to the next slide. The CPUC tried to sell NEM 3 as they were saying, hey, this is going to increase battery installations. And we're all for increasing battery installations. We want to get to the point where batteries are available to everybody who has solar. There's all kinds of reasons why that would be great. Batteries are pretty spendy right now, and the price is coming down, but it's taking a while. It's not the case. This is what battery installations would have been over the last year or so had the CPUC just left things alone. And this is what battery installations are now. So they're still happening, but they're less actually than under NEM 3, which is what we told them. We said that if you have less people installing solar, then you're gonna have less people getting a battery. That's kind of simple math. And of course they didn't listen. So that if you've been hearing CPUC say that, that's turned out to be just a total nonsense. Okay, next slide. And then the other side of the coin in terms of this being really bad for middle and working class people is that we've seen the largest decline in clean energy jobs since the clean energy transition began. Almost 20,000 jobs have been lost, rooftop solar jobs, since this whole started. To put that in context, there was about 65,000 total solar jobs in California before NEM 3. So more than 20% of the workforce. These are skilled, right? People who trained to install it. For many of them, it took years to hone their craft. They built careers around it. These, on the whole, were good paying jobs. This is about people on average, rooftop solar installers, make about $75,000 a year with full health benefits. So these were good middle class jobs. And they're not going to come back. These people are not going to be able to come back. They're going into other fields. So we've experienced also a brain drain at a time when we need to be putting our pedal to the metal if California is serious about this whole clean energy thing. Okay, next slide. And speaking of the clean energy thing, California politicians talk a real big game when it comes to, getting off fossil fuels and getting 100% of the electricity from renewables, right? But the talk is not matching the actions. So to just give you a sense of things, Governor Newsom says that he wants California almost completely off fossil fuels by 2035. And it's possible to do that on paper. It might even be possible to do it in practice, but what it means is everything needs to work perfectly. Large-scale wind has to get deployed at a record pace. Solar farms have to get built at a record pace. And rooftop solar has to get built at a record pace. You can't do it with just one or the other. And this chart illustrates that. These first 4 bars are the last couple of years of solar, both solar farms and rooftop solar. The blue is new solar farms that were put in place, and the yellow is new rooftop solar that was put in place, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023. If we were to hit Governor Newsom's goal of getting almost off fossil fuels by 2035, we have to add 10 gigawatts of new solar, both large scale and rooftop, every single year for the next bunch of years. And you can see, even when rooftop solar was growing a lot, we still were not getting to 10 gigs because it's hard to put in a lot of large scale solar too. There's only one year where we came even close to 10 gigawatts. Now rooftop solar has fallen off a cliff, right? So this was where rooftop solar was going. This line, you would see a lot of yellow here if the Newsom administration hadn't gutted it. Now this is what we're going to be seeing, which means if we want to get those 10 gigawatts a year, all of this has to get made up with solar farms. And if you look at kind of the past history, that's a bit of a stretch. Now, utility proponents and other politicians kind of wave this away and go, oh no, but we're like making it easier to site the land and we're getting rid of some of the red tape. And that'll help a little bit, but it's a lot of baloney to think that you're going to get every single year all of this, you're going to build this much new solar farms and wind farms, especially once we get around to here. It's only going to get harder because there's going to be less available land. And to be clear, we have no problem with solar farms. We are not one of those folks that it's got to be like one thing or another. It's just to say this shows you needed both of these things and you needed both of these things to grow. And you went and basically shot yourself in the foot by doing this. So how about those clean energy goals, Governor Newsom? It's a lot of talk, but your actions indicate that maybe you're not so serious about it. All right, let's go to the next slide. And so let me just sum this up, and then we'll turn this back to Kaylee to close, and then we'll do questions. Is next time you hear someone say that rooftop solar is to blame for rising rates, or that rooftop solar users don't pay their fair share, or whatever you hear, you can tell them that that's absolute nonsense. And you can use this slide deck and the resources that we've got on our website to help you. Utility spending is out of control, and that's why. And regulators have been asleep at the switch, right? That's why electricity bills are so high. And in fact, rooftop solar is the key tool to get electricity rates down. And so, Kaylee, why don't you close us out here on that note?
Absolutely. So just looping back to what we said at the very top of this webinar, more rooftop solar and batteries benefits everybody. It means that the grid is less expensive because the monopoly utilities have to build less stuff. It means we have fewer blackouts. It means consumers have more choices, more control over their energy. It means we could meet those clean energy goals on schedule that Dave was just showing you. And it means that open space is protected. Coming back to this comic, the cost shift lie is designed to protect utility profits. That's what it's for. It allows them to scapegoat rooftop solar and continue to get away with wildly increasing their spending, which wildly increases the rates, which wildly increases their profits that we pay for. We should celebrate solar consumers as heroes. You are folks who are doing the right thing to get some control over your energy and where it comes from, to help out your neighbors and help out the planet. And there is a set of things that leaders could do to really get rooftop solar growing again. And this is that list. First and foremost, they could stand by the basic right of consumers to make energy from the sun without penalty. They also need to stop harassing solar customers on NEM 1 and NEM 2. You signed your contracts, they should honor those contracts. Our leaders should do no more harm to the solar market. That means they need to reject high fixed charges, any kind of solar tax, and they need to reverse the agency decision that has banned trained licensed solar contractors from installing batteries, including the ones that they themselves have installed and then are repairing. Our leaders also need to get rooftop solar and batteries going again, and that means setting new goals for growth, since we're off track for what the initial goals were going to be, which would mean either modifying NEM 3, creating a robust battery incentive, or expanding aggregation programs. And I want to pause here for just a second to define a few of these terms for anyone who might not know. NEM 1 and NEM 2 refer to the first two versions of net metering, that program whereby you get some credit for the extra energy you send back to the grid. NEM 3 is the version that cut that credit substantially. So if we want to get rooftop solar, and batteries growing again, then these are the things that leaders can do. The last piece is reversing the perverse incentives that cause the utilities to block rooftop solar and batteries, and also removing interconnection barriers, which when you've got the solar on the roof and the utilities are just wildly dragging their feet at interconnecting those solar systems so that folks can use them. So this is the part where we've given you a whole lot of information. We've shown you the new data. We're excited to take your questions on that shortly. We've given you a clear picture of where we stand. And now the question is, what can we all do about it? We have a new webpage where we have packaged all of this information together in a way that we hope is clear and concise. We'd love your feedback. So if you have ideas, please send those our way. The web address is right here, and I'll read it out for anyone who needs it. It's just solarrights.org/cost-shift. And on that webpage at the bottom, after all the content, there are these three sets of things that folks can do. There is a petition that you can sign to your elected officials. There is a toolkit for deeper ways to get involved, including opportunities for face-to-face interactions with your legislators, which we are finding have been extraordinarily powerful. And there is an opportunity to sign up for updates and alerts so that when we do a webinar like this, or when we have a meeting where folks can come and discuss these issues, you will know about it. And if there's a way for folks to take action on an immediate issue, we'll make sure you know about that too. So again, this is the web page where we have packaged all of this content together. We've got actions folks can take at the bottom, both immediately right away on your computer tonight, and actions that you can take in the future at various different levels. I also want to just say that below that, we have all the citations. So for my folks out there who want to see and analyze those graphs, who want to dig into all of the data, that is there for all of you. So thank you all so much for coming here this evening. We're just thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with you about these topics. We're going to move now to the Q&A session. And so I just want to repeat a couple of things to make sure that folks have the information. Number one is, if you have a question, please go down to the bottom of your screen and put that in the Q&A box. That's where we'll be drawing the questions from. So if you've been raising your hand, we're going to draw questions from the Q&A instead. There are over 60 questions in the Q&A right now, and we will obviously not be getting to all of them in the next 15 minutes or so. If your question doesn't get answered, or if we answer your question and you would like more information, please send us an email, info, I-N-F-O, @solarrights.org. So I'm going to go ahead and stop a share. So it's just Dave and I, and the way we're going to run this, folks, is I'm going to just work on selecting a few questions, and I'll read them out to Dave. He'll provide an answer, and we'll go from there. Sound good, Dave?
Yep. Sounds great.
Okay.
I'm excited. I love these questions already.
I know these are great. So one question that I think is just important to clarify for terms, we have someone asking, why are we using the term poles and wires, since all the infrastructure is in some ways literally physically connected together? And the question also involves, does that include new generation in addition to poles and wires or not? So maybe we could just clarify why we're using this term poles and wires.
Yeah, it's because the primary, yes, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that utilities spend money on, and that does include other infrastructure like solar farms, wind farms, right? Like, whatever, battery, giant battery facilities. But the data, if you're trying to kind of get to the question of what is driving the rate increases, it turns out that, I'll just repeat the statistic and embellish on it, is a little more than 90% of the rate increases are a direct result of spending increases on transmission and distribution alone. That's the cost driver, which we call poles and wires sometimes because it's just an easier term, but it's the same thing. And so, yeah, that's the most expensive. It's the most expensive thing that they've been spending the most on, and what they've been increasing their spending on. And as a result, that's why the rates have been going up. And it kind of makes sense because the utilities don't make their profit on the generation part of the thing. They make their profit on poles and wires. This is a deal that they made with the state some number of years ago. It's their business model, essentially. And so the state guarantees that, for every dollar they spend on a new pole or a new wire, they get to tack on an 8 to 10% profit. So they're acting very logically, not reasonably, but they're acting very logically in going like, well, heck, if I can get a guaranteed profit on that, I'm going to try to slip as much of that spending through as I possibly can. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Dave. Another question we have is, how much of the transmission line build out by utilities is going to transporting those new sources of electricity from solar farms and wind?
Yeah, it's a good question. And that, I don't know the answer to that. And I think that would require some more research. So I'm writing that down. But so what we can say is what we've said before, which is it's not really wildfire mitigation that's driving that spending. And it's not an increase in overall peak electricity demand. And the reason why it's important to say that it's not that is because the whole grid, the grid planning strategy is essentially to build a grid that allows you to meet the needs of the state on the peakiest days of the year, the days of the year when we're using the most amount of electricity. There's about 10 days out of the year, the hottest ones, when everyone's running their ACs and everything like that. And the entire grid is built around that. And so that can be a dicey affair. So it's important to get it right. And when you have a situation where the utilities were essentially building infrastructure as if electricity demand was going that way, when really all the signs were that it was going this way, what it suggests is that the regulators were not scrutinizing this spending. They were not asking questions like your question, which is like, what exactly do we need and where do we need it? They were just rubber stamping, rubber stamping, rubber stamping, rubber stamping, and in literally rubber stamping. We learned that 60% of all transmission spending is just what's called self-approved, meaning like the regulators don't even have to scrutinize it. The utilities can just write themselves a check. And the state auditor did a report last year that faulted the CPUC and the public advocate for just totally, dropping the ball on scrutinizing distribution spending. And so it's a good question. I think it's worth, unpacking that a bit. But one thing we can say very clearly is that a good chunk of that spending, an awful lot of it, just does not correlate with all the reasons why you really would logically do that kind of spending. And so certainly none of it has to do with rooftop solar, right? Like it's just it's a complete, hopefully we've made that case very, very clear.
Dave, I'm getting a series of questions that are thematically connected. So folks, I just want to say I'm going to kind of combine these ones, and hopefully, Dave, you'll be able to address them in whole, rather than in part. Folks are asking about the relationships between the California Public Utility Commission, the governor, the CSLB, the legislature. How are all these groups connected together? And if we have leaders like Newsom who are making bad choices when it comes to rooftop solar, what can people do about that?
Yeah. Okay. Wow. A lot of things there. So
yeah, a lot of things. So maybe terms first.
Yeah, right.
Let's start with terms.
Yeah. Well, so, I think let's just start with kind of the thing that I think everybody knows, which is that the utilities have way too much power, and they abuse that power. How do they get that power? Well, we know that they spent $190 million in campaign contributions to elected officials at every level of government since the year 2000. Governor Newsom alone has received $2.5 million from the utilities over the last, bunch of years. And many of the politicians in the state legislature also are benefit from the utilities campaign contributions. The CPUC is just an instrument of the governor, right? I mean, like technically they are an independent agency, but honestly, anybody who really knows how things work in Sacramento, like if you really talk to people in Sacramento about how things work, the governor appoints the members of the CPUC, and while they theoretically can act independently, that's not really how it works in practice. They do what the governor wants. And this is not unique to Governor Newsom. This is just how California politics works. And so the CPUC is just carrying out an agenda that was already developed by the Newsom administration. And that's not surprising, given it is surprising, frankly. You would think that somebody who talks as much as he does about wanting to solve climate change and get clean energy wouldn't be going down this road. But we also look at these campaign contributions and the history. And so now that's kind of clear. So that's the connection between Governor Newsom and the legislature, and probably the CSLB, the Contractor Licensing Board, since that's the executive branch, right? Like, it kind of makes sense. The legislature is, I think, a different story. It's a similar story, but different, in that I think we've found that the legislature, first, it's more diverse, right? It's 120 people, not one. And there are a lot of champions in the legislature for rooftop solar. This legislative session was kind of amazing. I mean, there were a lot of bills that got introduced to try to fix this mess, by people who we did not expect to step up and stand up. And they were doing that because they were hearing from constituents, and they were also just concerned about what's going on. It was amazing. And then also, the bill to try to stop the big utility tax, which ultimately failed. There were, more than 24 legislators from both parties who actively were, co-authoring that bill. It was, it got squashed by leadership, but the rank and file was ready to go on that. And then, there was one bill that did make it all the way through. This was the bill, as Kaylee mentioned before, that would have um, restored the right of renters and schools to just use their own energy rather than having to buy it from the utility. And that did pass the legislature by an almost supermajority. So that's something to be said. Like an almost supermajority of the legislature stood up for the basic solar right to make energy from the sun and not have to buy electricity from the utility. Um, and then the governor vetoed it. So, it's obviously the utilities have too much influence, but if you read our most recent newsletter, which I hope people got, and I hope they did, and if you didn't get it or you don't think you're on the list, you should sign up, because this is where we put a lot of these things in writing. I actually see green shoots in the legislature out of this session. A lot of legislators really stood up and started fighting and finding their voice. Many of them they're getting this information that we're presenting to you. And a lot of them are going like, crackerjack, we're going to use this information to push this. We're going to push back. We're not going to let these guys get away with these lies. We're going to try to convince our colleagues that this is the right thing to do. And no governor, we don't have kings, right? This governor will pass. There will be a new governor. If you're, out there, you should be using your voice and going and vetting, contacting the folks that are running for governor right now, and demanding that they share where they stand. And you should be looking for opportunities to meet them on the campaign trail. If you're the kind of person that makes donations, you might want to consider withholding a donation until and tell them you'll make a donation if they come down good on rooftop solar. Betty Yee is one of the candidates who's running. She was the state controller, and she's already made some pretty strong statements. So that's good. We need more of them. So all I can say is we have stopped a solar tax now, not once, but twice, but 3 times. That is probably one of our best accomplishments so far. That utility tax could have been $75. It's 24. We got to fight it. We got to stop it from growing. We want to ultimately bring it back down to like 10. We got a lot of work to do, but we have friends and we need to make more of them. And you can help do that. And we should never, this is the last thing I'll say on the soapbox, and then let's move to the next question, is okay. They've had a 150-year-old monopoly, right? They have been able to run everything for 150 years, and you're disrupting that monopoly. And power just never gives up without a fight. And so we should not have ever assumed that we could just, slip in just like 15 short years. It's just a fight. But you're disrupting the monopoly. You're consumers and you're standing up for yourselves, and we have allies and friends, and we need to make more.
Next question is a clarification. Do the monopoly utilities get profit from replacing poles and wires?
New poles and wires. That's how they make their profit.
This is a combined question. Why do the utilities get a guaranteed 10% rate of return? And do you have a better proposal for a business model that would work?
I love that question. The big picture, the deal that was made 150 years ago was that the utilities were going to be, these private companies were going to be given a monopoly to run the electricity system. And in exchange, they would have to adhere to price controls, like the regulators would set their price or have to approve their price, right? This doesn't happen in the private market. And in exchange for the price controls, the regulators would tell them what their profit's going to be and give them some kind of like certainty in exchange for the regulated nature. So that was what the deal was. The specifics have fluctuated a lot over 150 years, and this is the latest incarnation of it. Somebody thought it was a good idea to base their profits on this. I think there were a lot of people that argue that was not the best way to do it back then, but here we are. And it could have worked if the regulators weren't asleep at the switch. It could have worked if the utilities were not allowed to then buy off essentially the very people who appoint the regulators. But again, here we are. Do we have a better system? Yeah, we got ideas for a much better system. The principle would be that, some people will say the system should make the utilities public. Okay, so that's one solution. I'm kind of like iffy on that. Like, I think, yes, that certainly if we look at the publicly run utilities, their rates are lower. But we also see that publicly run utilities are just as antagonistic to rooftop solar as private utilities because a monopoly is a monopoly is a monopoly, and monopolies tend to think monopolistically. So making a utility public isn't necessarily a silver bullet. And also, we've seen that voters aren't necessarily always for that. The voters are mistrustful of government. So there's also like, how feasible is it? But it's a solution, and a lot of people like that solution. So it's worth mentioning. The other way you can do this is just be agnostic about whether it's public or private, but change the way that utilities make. But if they are private, you just change the way that they make their money, and you base it on performance. And so you just go, here's performance metrics. If you can keep overall costs, at or around inflation, if you can make it so that there's only, a minimum number of blackouts or flex alerts, if you can make it, you pick a couple of metrics, right? Really basic kitchen table, plain vanilla metrics, then you get X profit, and probably not 10%. I think 5%, but something like that. You're still going to have problems, but just to say, don't base it on spending, because that's the easiest way to just have an out of control system. Yeah.
That's the recipe for increased spending and increased
you couldn't
rates.
have picked a better, right? So Hawaii is the one state that's experimenting with what's called performance-based metrics. And I think that's a very, very attractive thing that we ought to be looking at here. The other key policy thing that we've got to do in tandem is we've got to bake into energy planning essentially alternatives to poles and wires. Right now, the state doesn't recognize rooftop solar and batteries as an actual energy source with respect to planning. They've always just kind of said, nah, that's not real. It's not real, even though it's like, we've just showed you slides that show you like it's about as real can get. So the other thing that we've got to do that's sort of independent of the utilities is we got to get the beam counters and regulators to actually just officially recognize both your solar and the projected solar that's coming onto the grid as just as legit, and thus reduce the amount of poles and wires that they're projecting that the utilities have to build. If we even get close to those two things, even close, then it's a whole different system, and one that would work very, very well.
Thank you, Dave. I think we have about 2 minutes left. I'd love to toss 2 final questions your way. Does that sound good?
Yep.
All right. First question is, I heard you guys are involved in a lawsuit against PG&E's new NEM 3 rules. Is that true, and what's happening?
Yeah. If you go to our website and click the Learn More button, you'll see there's a lot of articles about a lot of things, but there is an update that's in depth about the lawsuit that's being referenced here. And I invite people to go to learn more. Again, it's on the website. There's a button. It's there. Yes, there is a lawsuit. It is being led by 3 nonprofit organizations that we work with very closely. We love them. We think they do great work. The Center for Biological Diversity, the Environmental Working Group, and the Protect Our Communities Foundation. They're the ones that are spearheading the lawsuit. We're supporting them. And they consulted with us. We like what they're doing. They allege that the CPUC, and we agree that the CPUC's ruling violated the law in a number of different ways. And the lawsuit was filed, I forget when it was filed. It was heard by a circuit court judge, and the judge rejected it. Our friends appealed to the state Supreme Court, and the state Supreme Court agreed to take the case, which is significant. They wouldn't have agreed to take the case if they didn't think there was some there. And from what I understand, they will schedule arguments sometime next year, and then maybe make a decision sometime next year. It's one of many things that we got to do. If that works in our favor, if they rule yes, it doesn't mean we get everything. What it means is the decision will get kicked back to the CPUC. They have to go back to the drawing board to some degree, and then we can fight that fight, hopefully now with a legal opinion on our side. That's where it's at. And you can read the lawsuit in depth, again, by going to our website, clicking on the Learn More button, and looking for the article in there about the lawsuit.
Final question for this evening. Just so folks know, we have almost 100 questions in the Q&A now, which is great. We want to answer those questions. So again, please email those to info@solarrights.org. Final question for the evening, Dave. Of the 90 or so questions that we have in here, at least a dozen of them are, what about a ballot measure? What about a ballot measure?
Yeah. One what about a ballot measure? I think that's a question that I'm glad that a lot of people are asking, because rooftop solar is incredibly popular. We know this. Like poll after poll after poll after poll shows that whether or not you have rooftop solar, you want more of it. You want it for yourself. You want it for other people. Some people like it because they see it as a way to save themselves money. Some people like it because they see it as a way to save the grid money. Some people like it because they see it as a way to save the environment. Choose your poison. But it's very, very, very popular. Poll after poll after poll has shown that the changes that have been made to gut rooftop solar are unpopular. People don't like it. They hear what's happening and they don't think it's a good thing for, again, a variety of reasons. So that would ask the question, well, shouldn't we just put these issues on the ballot and go right to the voters? We are asking ourselves that same question and doing our own due diligence to see if that's a possibility. And but I want to just tell people that, running a ballot measure is not an easy thing to do. I have done it in my career before, in a number of different contexts. It's hard work. It's expensive, even when you have awesome grassroots support. And you bet your bottom dollar that the utilities are going to spend a lot of money to defeat it. And they will lie to defeat it, right? They will say preposterous things. And then they will they will spend 50, 60, 70 million dollars to defeat it. And so if we're going to do something like that, then we have to be darn sure that there's going to be enough support to put it, to make it happen. And that support would have to be in the form of, the grassroots energy. I think we know that that's there. And it has to be in the form of money. And I think we have to take seriously if we're going to do it. And, we want to put our time and energy into something like that and put your time and energy into it. I've been around the block enough to just know that you'd want to be darn sure that there's a path, nothing is guaranteed in life, but that it would be worth the effort. So if you have that on your mind and you want to kind of talk about it more, if you have ideas and suggestions, or you want to hear more about like what we've been thinking about and considering, then I invite you to email us and we can get on the phone, do a little one-on-one. I love talking about it. It's on my mind a lot too.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Any final words? Otherwise, we'll go ahead and close it out. And I'll just say thank you all for coming here. We're really grateful that you've chosen to join us this evening. We will make sure that this recording is sent out to folks who registered for this event. And if you didn't get your question answered, and again, we're many, many, many questions now in that Q&A box, please send us an email, info@solarrights.org. To you, Dave, for any final words.
I just want to really take seriously, it's not BS. Do send us that email. The worst thing you have to do is just write your question twice, right? You put it in there and then send us an email. If you have any experience emailing Solar Rights Alliance, we respond to every single email. We have a zero inbox policy, and especially questions about this content are really important to us to be able to answer. And it's also we want to keep these things generally to an hour. So there's that balance, but please, please, please don't let it hang. We want to engage with you, and sometimes email is even better because we get to have a little bit of a thread. And if you've had any experience with that, we love doing that. It's one of our favorite things to do. We think it's one of the most important things to do because we want you to really have ownership over this information, over these facts, over this data, so that you can go out and educate your legislator, educate local reporters, write that letter to the editor that needs to be written, whatever it is that you need to do. So I just want to really, it's a heartfelt invitation to send us those questions. And we promise, that's a promise we can keep, and it's a promise we have kept. So, so do it, please. And then just thank you for everything that you've done. This is a challenging fight, but if it was easy, then, we probably wouldn't be here. And this is worth it. This is obviously something worth fighting for. It has profound implications for freedom, in my view, and independence, and about resilience, and about all the things that really, America is supposed to be about. And, I think I see what you're doing and what we're doing here as really on the front lines of fighting for opportunity, for freedom, for social mobility, for keeping wealth in our community and in our families and in our homes rather than giving it away to a monopoly. And so I'm really proud to be doing this fight with you. And it's just about the best thing I could imagine doing. And so I salute you for choosing to try to dig into this issue, and more to come.
I second that. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.